The November fog pressed against the windows of 221B Baker Street like some malevolent spirit seeking entry, its grey tendrils seeming to muffle even the familiar sounds of London's evening bustle. I had been attempting to lose myself in the latest issue of The Lancet, when Holmes, who had spent the better part of the afternoon in one of his peculiar chemical experiments, suddenly raised his head from his apparatus with that characteristic alertness that invariably preceded the arrival of a new case. "A man of railways approaches, Watson," he announced, setting aside his test tubes with deliberate precision. "Note the particular cadence of his step upon the stair, measured, punctual, yet betraying an underlying urgency that speaks of schedules disrupted and order disturbed." Hudson's gentle knock confirmed my friend's observation, and she ushered into our sitting room a spare gentleman whose bearing immediately suggested the disciplined world of the railway service. His dark coat bore the telltale traces of coal dust, and his boots showed the distinctive clay of the Thames marshlands. Before our visitor could speak, Holmes had risen from his chair with that fluid grace that marked his moments of heightened interest. "Mr. Thornfield of the Southeastern Railway, I presume," Holmes said, gesturing toward the chair opposite. "Your concern regards the Ironwood Crossing incident, and judging by the violet ink upon your cuff and the particular urgency of your arrival, I venture that this matter involves a disappearance of most unusual circumstances." Our visitor started visibly, then composed himself with the practiced control of a man accustomed to managing crises. "Mr. Holmes, your reputation precedes you, though I confess myself astonished at your immediate grasp of my situation. Indeed, I come regarding a most perplexing vanishing that has left both the local constabulary and my superiors completely baffled." Chair, producing a leather portfolio with hands that trembled slightly despite his outward composure. "Yesterday evening, Mr. Edgar Whitmore, a gentleman of impeccable reputation and regular habits, boarded the 5:15 from London Bridge, bound for Ironwood Crossing. He occupied a first-class compartment, which he secured from within according to his usual custom. The journey proceeded without incident until we reached the signal box at Marsh Halt, where a mechanical failure required us to pause for repairs. Holmes had begun his familiar pacing before the fireplace, his keen eyes fixed upon our visitor with that intensity that seemed to dissect every word and gesture. "Continue, Mr. Thornfield. I perceive there are details of particular significance yet to be revealed." "Indeed, sir. When we resumed our journey and arrived at Ironwood Crossing some 20 minutes later, Mr. Whitmore's compartment remained locked from within. His fiancée, Miss Catherine Pembroke, awaited him on the platform as was their weekly custom. When he failed to emerge, we forced the door using the guard's master key, only to discover the compartment entirely empty. His traveling bag, hat, gloves, and evening paper remained precisely as they had been observed through the window during our delay. Yet Mr. Whitmore himself had vanished completely. I found myself leaning forward, captivated despite having witnessed numerous such impossibilities in Holmes's company. "The windows, surely, both latched securely from within, Dr. Watson." The near window showed curious smears of what appeared to be adhesive substance, and we discovered several strands of blue silk caught in the latch mechanism. Most peculiar of all, a telegram arrived at Miss Pembroke's residence that very evening, purportedly from Mr. Whitmore, claiming urgent business had detained him in London, yet it was dispatched from Charing Cross at precisely the moment our train was approaching Ironwood Crossing. Holmes ceased his pacing abruptly, his eyes gleaming with that particular light that indicated his mind had begun to perceive patterns invisible to ordinary observation. "Fascinating," he murmured. "A locked compartment, temporal impossibilities, adhesive residue, and silk threads. Watson, kindly retrieve your coat and medical bag. Mr. Thornfield, I trust transportation to Ironwood Crossing can be arranged with utmost haste. This case promises to challenge even the most fundamental assumptions about the nature of physical possibility itself." Within the hour, we found ourselves rattling southward through the November darkness, the rhythmic clatter of wheels against rails, providing a hypnotic counterpoint to Holmes's intense concentration. He sat motionless in the corner of our first-class compartment, his sharp profile silhouetted against the fog-shrouded landscape rushing past our window. Yet, I could sense the extraordinary activity of his mind as it sifted through the peculiar details of Mr. Whitmore's impossible vanishing. Thornfield occupied the opposite seat with the rigid composure of a railway man accustomed to schedules and precision, though his frequent glances at his pocket watch betrayed an underlying anxiety that spoke of disrupted order and unexplained mysteries. "The telegram troubles me most profoundly," Holmes murmured suddenly, his eyes still fixed upon the passing darkness. "A message dispatched from Charing Cross at the precise moment our missing gentleman should have been approaching Ironwood Crossing aboard this very line. The temporal impossibility suggests either supernatural intervention, which I categorically reject, or human deception of extraordinary sophistication." The fog seemed to thicken as we approached our destination, transforming the familiar countryside into an alien landscape of shadows and uncertain shapes. Ironwood Crossing emerged from this grey veil, like something from a Gothic tale, a lonely station platform illuminated by scattered gas lamps that cast wavering pools of yellow light into the surrounding marshland. The stationmaster, a weathered fellow named Pike, awaited our arrival with obvious relief, his cap clutched respectfully in work-worn hands. "We've preserved everything exactly as you requested, Mr. Thornfield," Pike reported, casting nervous glances at Holmes. "The compartment remains locked and untouched since the police completed their examination yesterday evening." Miss Catherine Pembroke stood waiting in the shadow of the booking office, and I was immediately struck by her composed dignity, despite the obvious strain etched upon her refined features. She was a woman of perhaps 30 years, with intelligent eyes and a determined bearing that spoke of considerable inner strength. Her dark traveling dress was impeccably maintained, though I noticed the slight tremor in her gloved hands as she approached our small group. "Mr. Holmes," she said, inclining her head with quiet grace, "I cannot adequately express my gratitude for your willingness to investigate Edgar's disappearance. He is a man of absolute regularity in all his habits, incapable of the thoughtless abandonment that others have suggested." Holmes bowed gravely, his keen gaze taking in every detail of her appearance with that peculiar intensity that marked his moments of heightened observation. "Miss Pembroke, your confidence in Mr. Whitmore's character may prove invaluable to our investigation. Tell me, did he ever employ the phrase, 'detained by business' in his correspondence?" A slight frown crossed her features. "Never, Mr. Holmes. Edgar would write, 'kept by business,' when circumstances required such explanation. He found the formal phrasing unnecessarily pompous." "Most illuminating," Holmes replied, and I detected that familiar gleam in his eyes that invariably preceded significant deductions. Pike led us to the siding where the fateful compartment waited in isolated silence. The first-class carriage bore the unmistakable marks of thorough police investigation, chalk outlines, fingerprint powder, and the lingering chemical odors of forensic examination. Holmes approached the sealed door with the methodical precision of a surgeon, producing his magnifying glass as Pike turned the key with obvious reluctance. The compartment exhaled an atmosphere of abandonment and mystery as we stepped inside. Holmes immediately focused his attention upon the window latch, where I could discern faint traces of some translucent substance and several threads of blue silk caught in the mechanism. "Isinglass," he murmured, touching the residue delicately with his penknife. "A adhesive favored by milliners for stiffening silk ribbons." Mr. Whitmore's personal effects remained precisely as they had been discovered, his hat resting crown upward upon the opposite seat, his evening paper folded with one corner turned down, and his traveling bag positioned with mathematical precision beside the window. Holmes examined each item with painstaking care, his movements economical yet thorough. "The mathematics are quite unforgiving, Watson," he observed, measuring the compartment's dimensions with his pocket rule. No conventional means of escape existed, yet our gentleman has vanished as completely as morning mist. We must therefore seek unconventional explanations. As Holmes continued his examination, I found myself increasingly convinced that we faced a mystery that would challenge even his extraordinary deductive powers. Holmes's examination of the compartment continued with that methodical precision which had earned him such renown among the criminal classes of London, his keen eyes missing no detail, however minute or seemingly insignificant. He lifted Mr. Whitmore's hat with delicate fingers, turning it slowly beneath the gaslight to examine the faint impressions within the crown. A man of precise habits. "Watson," he observed quietly, noting the consistent wear pattern that spoke of regular, careful placement, yet observed no hair oil upon the inner band. No perspiration stains. Despite yesterday's unseasonable warmth, this hat was placed, not worn during the journey. The evening paper received equally thorough scrutiny as Holmes unfolded it with reverent care, his gaze sweeping across columns of parliamentary debates and commercial advertisements. He paused at a small classified notice buried among the theatrical announcements, his brow furrowing slightly before refolding the journal with mathematical precision. Note the corner turned down at page 7, Watson marking an article concerning railway safety legislation. Most curious reading for a gentleman engaged in routine travel. Miss Pembroke stepped forward, her composure wavering momentarily. Edgar maintained investments in several railway ventures. Mr. Holmes, though he rarely discussed such matters with me, he considered financial conversation unsuitable for feminine ears. "Indeed," Holmes murmured, filing away this revelation with characteristic efficiency. "Miss Pembroke, I must examine that telegram with absolute precision. The temporal aspects of this case present certain impossibilities that demand explanation." She produced the yellow telegraph form from her reticule, her fingers trembling as Holmes studied it through his magnifying glass. "Dispatched from Charing Cross at 6:37 precisely," he noted, "yet our train departed London Bridge at 5:15 and reached Ironwood Crossing by 6:42. The mechanical delay at Marsh Halt extended the journey by mere minutes, creating a temporal impossibility unless we accept that Mr. Whitmore possessed supernatural abilities." Mr. Thornfield consulted his chronometer with railway precision. "The timestamps are absolutely accurate, Mr. Holmes. Our logs confirm these times exactly." Holmes returned to the traveling bag, examining its contents with surgical attention. Inside lay a neatly folded nightshirt, spare collar, and volume of Emerson's essays, nothing suggesting struggle or hurried departure. Yet his fingers probed every seam, tested every corner, his expression growing increasingly thoughtful. The absence of a common article, Watson, often proves more telling than its presence. Kneeling beside the window, Holmes retrieved his glass vial and carefully scraped samples of the isinglass residue, then extracted another silk thread with his tweezers. "Not ordinary silk, Watson. The weave is uncommonly fine, almost gossamer, and this particular shade of sapphire blue is rarely encountered in everyday apparel." He held the strand to the light, studying its lustrous quality with evident satisfaction. His attention shifted to the floor beneath the seats, where among the usual railway dust, he discovered a minuscule sliver of dark, polished wood, unlike the lighter pine of the compartment's construction. This, too, disappeared into a separate envelope with meticulous care. "Trifles to the unobservant eye," he remarked, "yet trifles often illuminate the grandest deceptions." Pike cleared his throat nervously from the doorway. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Holmes, but young Tommy Hartwell at the signal box mentioned seeing a gentleman walking the embankment during our delay. Thought it peculiar." "What with the fog and late hour?" Holmes turned sharply, his eyes blazing with renewed interest. This observation was omitted from the police report. Where precisely did this sighting occur? "About a quarter-mile back along the line, near the old drainage culvert. Tommy said the gentleman seemed to be examining something on the ground, though the fog made clear observation difficult." "Fascinating," Holmes breathed, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. He stood, surveying the compartment one final time with that particular expression that indicated significant deductions forming. The stage is set, Watson. We have here not merely an impossible disappearance, but an elaborate theatrical performance requiring considerable preparation and inside knowledge. His gaze fell upon the guard who had been hovering anxiously near the platform. "Mr. Latham, I believe your precision with the master key is much admired. Tell me, did you observe anything unusual during the delay at Marsh Halt?" The guard's composure flickered almost imperceptibly, and I noticed Holmes's eyes narrow with predatory interest as he detected that telltale sign of nervous deception that had betrayed so many criminals in our shared adventures. Guard Latham's weathered face betrayed the slightest tremor of anxiety as Holmes fixed him with that penetrating stare which had unnerved countless witnesses throughout our partnership. The man's fingers worried at his cap, brim with increasing agitation, and I observed the telltale sheen of perspiration upon his brow despite the November chill. "Nothing unusual during the delay, you say?" Holmes repeated softly, his voice carrying that dangerous quietness which invariably preceded devastating revelations. "Yet your boots tell a curious tale, Mr. Latham. The distinctive blue-grey clay upon your soles is not the standard railway ballast, but the sediment found only in the marsh drainage channels some distance from the tracks." The guard's composure cracked visibly under this precise observation, his hands trembling as he clutched his cap. "I may have walked the embankment briefly, sir, checking the signals in the fog. Company regulations require thorough inspection during delays." "Indeed," Holmes replied, stepping closer with predatory grace. "And during this inspection, did you perhaps encounter anyone else examining the vicinity? The same gentleman young Tommy observed from the signal box, perhaps?" Latham's resistance finally crumbled under Holmes's relentless scrutiny. "There was a lady, sir," he admitted miserably. "Well-dressed, refined manner of speaking. She approached during the delay, claimed to have dropped a brooch while boarding, and begged permission to search the corridor floor. Wore a blue silk ribbon at her throat. I recall distinctly." Miss Pembroke drew a sharp breath, her composure strained to the breaking point, while Holmes's eyes blazed with sudden comprehension. "You admitted her to the first-class corridor? The very section containing Mr. Whitmore's compartment?" "Only the corridor, sir. I swear upon my mother's grave. Never opened the gentleman's door itself. She seemed respectable, carried herself like quality folk, had a small leather case with her, said it contained her sewing implements for mending the ribbon that had caught on something." Holmes's hand moved instinctively to the window latch, where the blue thread still glimmered in the gaslight. "Your ribbon-mending lady left more than memories behind, Mr. Latham. Describe her precisely: height, bearing, any distinctive features." "Medium height, dark traveling dress, face partially concealed by a mourning veil. Spoke with educated accent, very proper-like. She worked quickly, seemed to know exactly where to search, then thanked me and disappeared back into the fog." Holmes turned sharply toward Mr. Thornfield, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. "The timing becomes crucial. How long did this mysterious lady remain in the corridor?" "No more than 5 minutes, Mr. Holmes. She was most efficient in her search." "Efficient indeed," Holmes murmured, producing his notebook to record these crucial details. "Mr. Thornfield, did Mr. Whitmore maintain any business associations that might involve feminine accomplices? Partners, perhaps, with access to inside railway knowledge?" The railway official considered carefully. "His primary associate is Mr. Aldrich Vance, who manages several warehouses near the Thames docks. Whitmore mentioned some recent disagreement regarding their shipping ventures, though he provided no specifics. Vance has a sister, I believe, who occasionally handles correspondence for their business." "Most illuminating," Holmes replied, his eyes gleaming with that particular light which indicated significant deductions forming. "Watson, we must examine the culvert immediately." The physical evidence will either confirm or refute this elaborate performance. We set out at once across the fog-shrouded marshland, following the railway embankment toward the drainage culvert where young Tommy had observed the mysterious gentleman. Holmes moved with the focused intensity of a bloodhound, his lantern sweeping low across the ballast and surrounding vegetation. Within moments, he had discovered twin rectangular impressions pressed into the grey stones beside the track. "The feet of a folding ladder, Watson," he announced with satisfaction, kneeling to examine the markings with his magnifying glass. Placed and removed with practiced precision, note the crescent of crushed grit at each inner edge, indicating considerable weight was supported. A few yards further, caught upon a bramble bush, hung another strand of that distinctive sapphire silk. Holmes extracted it carefully with his tweezers, comparing it to the sample from the compartment window. Identical weave and dye, confirming our mysterious lady's presence at this location. His attention shifted to the railway carriage itself, where the fog had beaded the painted surface with trembling pearls of moisture. Using his metal probe, Holmes traced the window frame with surgical precision until the point caught against a nearly invisible loop of silk thread fixed within the mechanism. Ingenious, Watson. A silk filament, secured with isinglass adhesive, led from this concealed loop across to the outer window beading. A careful pull from outside would lower the latch, while a second manipulation would return it to the locked position after use. The technical elegance of the deception was breathtaking in its simplicity, yet I could see that Holmes remained troubled by deeper implications. The lady provided access and opportunity, he mused, straightening to survey the lonely marshland. Yet the gentleman with the wooden case provided the mechanical expertise. This was no spontaneous crime of passion, Watson, but a carefully orchestrated performance requiring inside knowledge of railway operations, precise timing, and considerable preparation. As we prepared to return to the station, Holmes paused to examine one final detail. A minuscule sliver of dark, polished wood embedded in the ballast near the ladder impressions. Mahogany, Watson, of exceptional quality. Not the common pine of railway construction, but the fine cabinet work of expensive luggage or professional instruments. The fog swirled around us as we made our way back toward the platform, and I could not escape the growing conviction that we faced an adversary of exceptional cunning. One who had transformed Mr. Whitmore's regular journey into an elaborate stage for his own mysterious disappearance. Upon our return to the station platform, Holmes immediately sought out the signal box where young Tommy Hartwell awaited our inquiry with the nervous energy of one whose sharp observations had suddenly gained tremendous importance. The cramped wooden structure above the rails provided an excellent vantage point for surveillance, and Tommy proved himself a most reliable witness, as he recounted the strange events during the mechanical delay. "The gentleman appeared from the direction of the drainage channel, sir," he reported earnestly, his hands gesturing to indicate the precise location. "Carried a substantial case of dark mahogany with brass corners, quality workmanship. It was heavy, too, from the careful way he managed it with both hands." Holmes leaned forward, with that intense interest which marked his moments of greatest concentration. "You observed him manipulate this case in some manner?" "Indeed, sir. Set it down most deliberate-like beside the culvert, opened it careful as you please, then seemed to arrange something inside before closing it again. Moved with purpose, as if following some rehearsed procedure. The timing relative to our train's position?" Tommy consulted his duty log with professional precision. "First spotted him when the locomotive passed the quarter-mile marker. By the time we received clearance to proceed, he'd vanished completely into the marshland beyond the drainage channel." This testimony confirmed Holmes's growing suspicions about the elaborate nature of the conspiracy, and we descended once more to examine the culvert with renewed purpose. His lantern revealed additional evidence that had escaped our earlier inspection: fresh boat tar smeared upon the stone coping and distinct rope wear at a low angle, consistent with a skiff held against the current. "Note the twin grooves in the mud bank, Watson," Holmes observed, pointing to marks that disappeared beneath the black water. Runners from a folding ladder, dragged away in considerable haste. The reconstruction was becoming chillingly clear, a coordinated effort involving precise timing, specialized equipment, and intimate knowledge of railway operations. Holmes extracted another brass brad from a crevice in the stonework, holding it delicately in the lamplight. Square cut. London manufacture, he murmured with satisfaction. Our mahogany case continues to shed its secrets. Miss Pembroke had waited with admirable composure during our investigation, though the implications of our discoveries had clearly shaken her refined sensibilities. When Holmes approached her with that gentleness he reserved for those suffering genuine distress, she produced a small folded card from her reticule. "Edgar sent this yesterday afternoon by messenger boy," she explained, her voice steady despite obvious strain. Simply stated, 5:15 as ever, kept by business until the hour. The initial C represents my Christian name, Mr. Holmes. He never used the word detained in his correspondence, considered it unnecessarily formal. Holmes examined the handwriting with his magnifying glass, his nostrils flaring slightly as he absorbed this crucial intelligence. Yet the telegram embraced that very word with suspicious enthusiasm. A forger may borrow tone, but rarely masters individual habit. "There is something else, Mr. Holmes," Miss Pembroke continued, her composure wavering momentarily. Edgar occasionally attended performances at the Egyptian Hall, finding the mechanical ingenuity of stage illusions fascinating from an engineering perspective. He once mentioned meeting a gentleman named Professor Blackwood, who specialized in what he called impossible escapes. Edgar was particularly impressed by an illusion involving a locked cabinet from which the performer vanished completely. The theatrical connection struck Holmes with visible force, his eyes blazing with sudden comprehension. "Professor Blackwood's methods involved assistants trained in precise timing, I presume?" "Precisely so." Edgar described elaborate mechanisms and coordinated performances that created seemingly impossible effects through careful preparation and inside knowledge. Mr. Thornfield, who had listened with increasing gravity, spoke for the first time in several minutes. "If railway personnel have been compromised, Mr. Holmes, this conspiracy extends far beyond simple criminal enterprise." "Indeed," Holmes replied, his gaze moving briefly to guard Latham, whose obvious discomfort had not escaped notice. "Someone possessed intimate knowledge of schedules, signal procedures, and mechanical vulnerabilities." Holmes turned his attention back to Miss Pembroke with renewed intensity. "Your earlier mention of Mr. Vance's sister troubles me considerably. Describe her precisely appearance, manner, any theatrical inclinations." "Miss Vivienne Vance is an educated woman of independent means, though some consider her manner rather dramatic. She handles correspondence for her brother's business and possesses considerable knowledge of shipping schedules and warehouse operations." "Theatrical," Holmes repeated softly, and I detected that familiar note of triumph, which indicated crucial connections forming in his remarkable mind. The sapphire silk threads, the precise timing, the elaborate misdirection all pointed toward a performance orchestrated by someone with both theatrical training and access to detailed railway intelligence. As we prepared for our return to London, Holmes issued precise instructions to the stationmaster regarding security at the culvert and arranged for immediate telegraph communication should any suspicious activity occur. The fog swirled around us as we boarded the late train, and I could not escape the growing conviction that we faced adversaries of exceptional cunning who had transformed Mr. Whitmore's disappearance into an elaborate stage production designed to confound even the most discerning investigation. The return journey to London provided Holmes with that contemplative silence essential to his extraordinary mental processes, though I observed his restless fingers drumming against the compartment window as the familiar landmarks of our approach to the capital emerged through the thinning fog. His keen eyes remained fixed upon the evidence samples arranged with methodical precision across his lap, and I could sense the extraordinary activity of his mind as it wove together the disparate threads of our investigation. "The telegram troubles me most profoundly, Watson," he murmured as we passed through the outer suburbs. "The word 'detained' represents a false note in an otherwise carefully orchestrated performance, suggesting our forger possessed theatrical skill, but lacked intimate knowledge of Mr. Whitmore's personal correspondence habits." Upon reaching Charing Cross, Holmes would permit no delay, but directed our cabman immediately to the telegraph office, where the evening shift still processed messages bound for country towns and channel ports. The clerk, a pale gentleman with ink-stained fingers, responded to Holmes's card with obvious curiosity, producing the counterfoil of the message dispatched to Miss Pembroke with professional pride. Holmes bent over the document beneath the harsh gaslight, his magnifying glass revealing details invisible to ordinary observation. Note the laborious block capitals, Watson, and the heavy downward strokes clear evidence of deliberate disguise by one unaccustomed to careful penmanship. The clerk's memory proved remarkably precise when encouraged by Holmes's methodical questioning. "Handed in by a messenger boy rather than a gentleman, sir. Dark cap pulled low, knitted comforter about his neck, paid in small silver and vanished immediately." Holmes inquired whether the boy bore any distinguishing odors or stains, and the man nodded thoughtfully. "A distinct tarry smell about him, sir, such as one associates with the Thames wharves, and his cuffs showed smudges as if he'd leaned against a boat's side." Holmes lifted the counterfoil delicately, his sensitive nostrils detecting traces I could not perceive. "Boat tar beyond question," he confirmed with satisfaction. "Combined with the violet ink common to this office, yet observe the faint smear along the lower margin, evidence of earlier handling by fingers sticky with marine pitch." We departed with Holmes curiously satisfied yet increasingly grave, his long fingers drumming a silent tattoo against his walking stick as our hansom rattled eastward through Holborn's narrow streets. He directed the driver to Clerkenwell, where a discreet brass plate announced Rook and Sons, cabinet makers to the theatrical profession. Though the hour was late, Holmes roused the elder Rook with characteristic persistence and the irresistible magnetism of his purpose. In the workshop's resin-scented atmosphere, Holmes placed our mahogany samples upon a measuring block, watching intently as the craftsman examined them beneath his lamp. "Spanish mahogany, Sir, Cuban old growth with shellac finish hardened by benzoin. That brass brad we supply specifically for traveling apparatus, requiring repeated assembly and disassembly. Hardware, principally for trunk illusions and collapsible stage cabinets." Holmes inquired with studied casualness. Rook consulted his ledger with deliberate care. 3 months passed, a commission for a portable cabinet fitted to a mahogany case with brass corners, custom latches, and interior groove for sliding panels. The purchaser's representative gave the name Miss Virel, though she signed the receipt simply V. Delivery requested to a warehouse near Wapping Old Stairs. Holmes's eyes met, mine in a flash of mutual understanding that required no words. "This Miss Virel spoke personally with you?" "Indeed, sir." Refined voice, theatrical bearing, paid promptly in gold sovereigns. Holmes closed the ledger gently, left his card with strict instructions regarding confidentiality, and guided me back into the fog-shrouded lane. "The pattern emerges with crystalline clarity, Watson," he murmured as we regained our cab. "Professor Blackwood's theatrical methods provide the template, but commerce supplies the stage machinery. Our mysterious V connects directly to Miss Vivienne Vance, whose dramatic sensibilities and access to railway intelligence make her the perfect accomplice for such elaborate deception." The fog had thickened to pearly curtains by the time we reached Baker Street, where Mrs. Hudson awaited with tea and the evening post. Holmes barely touched his refreshment, instead unfolding the telegram once more to study that emphatic word detained with sardonic interest. Tomorrow, Watson, we venture into theatrical territory where illusion masquerades as impossible truth. The morning brought with it a crystalline clarity that seemed to sharpen every detail of our Baker Street sitting room, and I found Holmes already immersed in a formidable array of documents, spread across our breakfast table like the pieces of some vast puzzle. Railway timetables, shipping manifests, and theatrical programs lay annotated with his precise, almost microscopic script, while telegrams from various contacts formed neat piles beside his untouched coffee. He glanced up as I entered, his eyes blazing with that particular intensity which invariably preceded decisive action in our investigations. "The pattern emerges with mathematical precision, Watson," he announced, gesturing toward a telegram bearing the Lloyds of London seal. "Our Mr. Aldrich Vance operates 3 warehouses near the Thames, specializing in what the manifest describes as exotic imports requiring discreet handling, precisely the sort of establishment where theatrical apparatus might be concealed among legitimate cargo. Most significant, however, is the intelligence that Miss Vivienne Vance holds power of attorney for all warehouse transactions, suggesting authority far beyond mere correspondence duties." Holmes rose abruptly, his breakfast abandoned in favor of immediate action. "We shall visit Professor Blackwood this morning, Watson. His theatrical methods provide the template for our impossible disappearance, and I suspect he may prove more forthcoming when approached directly rather than through intermediaries." The Egyptian Hall in Piccadilly presented its customary atmosphere of respectable mystery, with gilded advertisements proclaiming impossible wonders that defied natural law. Within, we found the stage dimly lit and cavernous, a few workmen adjusting draperies while the melancholy scratch of a violin drifted from the orchestra pit. Professor Blackwood received us in his private consulting room behind the stage, a cluttered sanctuary filled with mechanical drawings, silk scarves, and the aromatic residue of stage powders. He proved to be a gentleman of perhaps 50 years, with the precise bearing of one accustomed to split-second timing and the keen eyes of a natural observer of human weakness. "Mr. Holmes," he said, extending a hand stained with theatrical makeup, "your reputation for unraveling mysteries precedes you, though I confess surprise at finding you interested in stage illusions." Holmes settled into the offered chair with that deceptive casualness which masked his most penetrating inquiries. "Your cabinet escape, Professor, the one involving apparent disappearance from a locked compartment. I understand the mechanical principles fascinate engineering minds, particularly those with railway interests." Blackwood's expression grew cautious, though professional pride overcame his initial wariness. "The Vanishing cabinet represents months of careful preparation, Mr. Holmes. The apparatus requires precise construction, coordinated timing, and an assistant trained to execute her role with absolute precision. The effect depends entirely upon the audience accepting certain assumptions about physical impossibility. Your assistant," Holmes continued with studied casualness, "presumably possesses considerable mechanical aptitude beyond ordinary theatrical training." "Miss Evangeline performs with exceptional skill," Blackwood replied, his voice carrying a note of professional admiration. "A refined lady with connections to commercial enterprises, quite unusual for the theatrical profession. She recently departed for private engagements, claiming family business required her immediate attention." Holmes leaned forward with predatory interest, producing the silk threads from his evidence envelope. "This Miss Evangeline sapphire silk of this particular weave suggests connections beyond ordinary stage work. Her mechanical expertise extends to railway apparatus, perhaps?" The professor's composure cracked visibly as he recognized the implications of Holmes's inquiry. "If you suspect criminal application of theatrical methods, Mr. Holmes, I must protest my complete innocence. My illusions are designed for entertainment, not deception of malicious intent. Yet someone has adapted your principles to create an impossible disappearance from a locked railway compartment," Holmes replied. his voice carrying that dangerous quietness which had unnerved countless witnesses. The mechanical signature is unmistakable silk threads, isinglass adhesive, precise timing coordinated with railway delays. Blackwood's hands trembled as he reached for his brandy glass. Miss Evangeline expressed considerable interest in adapting stage methods to other applications. She claimed academic curiosity about mechanical principles, though her questions focused specifically upon railway carriages and compartment construction. She mentioned connections to shipping enterprises near the Thames. Holmes rose with grim satisfaction, though I detected underlying concern about the sophisticated nature of our adversaries. Professor, your cooperation may prove essential to preventing further criminal applications of your theatrical genius. We departed immediately for Wapping Old Stairs, where the grey immensity of the Thames rolled beneath a pewter sky, and the air hung heavy with mingled perfumes of tar, brine, and commercial enterprise. The warehouse specified in our intelligence presented a shuttered respectability to the street, though the ramshackle yard behind told a different story: scraped mud, scuffed stone, and recent activity despite its apparent abandonment. Holmes picked the simple lock with characteristic deftness, and we entered the cavernous interior, where dust motes danced in shafts of weak sunlight, filtering through grimy windows. The building smelled of old rope and foreign spices, with an underlying chemical tang that spoke of recent theatrical preparations. Holmes moved through the shadows with predatory grace, his bull's-eye lantern revealing the systematic search patterns of his extraordinary mind. Behind a towering stack of legitimate cargo, we discovered the evidence that confirmed our worst suspicions. There, partially dismantled, lay the mahogany cabinet described by Rook, its brass corners gleaming faintly and interior grooves for sliding panels clearly visible. Scattered nearby were fragments of that distinctive sapphire silk, while a heavy tarpaulin still bore the damp smell of Thames water and boat tar. Holmes knelt beside the apparatus, his fingers probing every joint and mechanism with surgical precision. Note the fresh scratches on these brass fittings, Watson, and the isinglass residue still sticky upon the sliding panels. This cabinet was employed very recently, then hastily dismantled by someone familiar with its construction. His lantern beam caught something else, a small rectangle of pasteboard wedged beneath one corner of the cabinet's base. Holmes extracted it carefully with his tweezers, revealing a railway ticket stub from London Bridge to Ironwood Crossing, dated the very day of Mr. Whitmore's disappearance. "The final piece of our theatrical puzzle," Holmes murmured, sealing the ticket in an evidence envelope. "Our missing gentleman was indeed transported in this very cabinet, though whether willingly or otherwise remains to be determined." As we prepared to depart, Holmes paused at the warehouse's loading door, his keen eyes studying the Thames beyond where several barges lay moored at the private wharf. "The escape route becomes clear, Watson. By water to avoid the pas, the complications of railway stations and omnibus routes, then overland to whatever destination our conspirators have prepared." The fog was beginning to thicken as we emerged into the grey afternoon, and Holmes's expression carried that particular intensity which marked his moments of approaching triumph, though I sensed his growing concern about the sophisticated nature of our adversaries and their willingness to transform theatrical art into criminal enterprise of the most elaborate and dangerous kind. The Thames fog swirled around us as we emerged from the warehouse, and Holmes's expression carried that particular intensity which marked his moments of approaching revelation, though I sensed his growing concern about the sophisticated nature of our adversaries and the precious time slipping away with each passing hour. The private wharf behind the building revealed fresh evidence of recent activity, with rope burns scarring the weathered timber where a vessel had been secured with considerable force, while the muddy foreshore bore distinctive impressions of heavy cargo transferred under cover of darkness. Holmes knelt beside these markings with surgical precision, his trained eye reading the criminal manuscript written in disturbed sediment and scattered debris. "Note the depth of these impressions, Watson," he observed, measuring the indentations with his pocket rule. Whatever departed from this wharf possessed considerable weight, entirely consistent with our mahogany cabinet containing human cargo, though whether willing or unwitting remains our most pressing concern. A fragment of canvas caught upon a rusted bollard drew his immediate attention, its edges torn as if ripped away in desperate haste. The material bore traces of that familiar boat tar, along with something far more significant, a small embroidered monogram in silk thread that matched our sapphire samples perfectly. V. Holmes read with grim satisfaction, though his voice carried an undertone of mounting urgency. Miss Vivienne Vance continues to scatter evidence, whether from theatrical carelessness or deliberate misdirection designed to lead us along predetermined paths. We were preparing our departure when a weathered waterman approached from the adjacent wharf, his curiosity evidently aroused by our systematic investigation of what appeared to be abandoned premises. "Begging your pardon, gentlemen," he called across the narrow channel separating the wharves. "But if you're seeking information about the barge that departed here yesterday evening, I might prove most helpful indeed." Holmes immediately crossed to the man's position, his manner combining natural authority with the promise of generous compensation for reliable intelligence. "Describe this vessel with absolute precision, size, markings, crew, direction of departure, and any unusual circumstances you may have observed." The waterman, encouraged by Holmes's obvious expertise and the gleam of silver coin, proved remarkably observant for one of his profession. Medium-sized cargo barge, freshly painted black with yellow trim along her waterline. Flew no merchant colors, but I noted Meridian painted across her stern in fresh gold letters. Departed with the evening tide just after sunset, heading downriver toward the Gravesend approaches. The crew and passengers, Holmes pressed with increasing intensity, his notebook already recording these crucial details with characteristic thoroughness. 3 persons aboard, sir. A gentleman in dark traveling coat who seemed uncomfortable with nautical matters, a refined lady in blue silk who directed operations with considerable authority, and the bargeman himself, a professional river hand by his movements. Most unusual was their cargo, a substantial wooden crate with brass corners that required all 3 to manage its considerable weight. Holmes's eyes blazed with that familiar light. Successful deduction, though I detected underlying anxiety about Mr. Whitmore's ultimate fate. "This crate you observed its handling with particular care?" "Indeed, sir. Treated it gentle as precious china." They did, as if the contents were both valuable and fragile. The lady supervised every movement with nervous attention, while the gentleman appeared increasingly agitated as departure time approached. This intelligence confirmed our worst fears about the theatrical conspiracy's true scope, transforming what had appeared to be elaborate misdirection into genuine kidnapping with international implications. Holmes immediately dispatched urgent telegrams to the river police at Gravesend and Thames Haven, providing detailed descriptions of the barge Meridian and requesting immediate interception should the vessel remain within English jurisdiction. As our hansom rattled through London's darkening streets toward Baker Street, Holmes maintained that ominous silence which invariably preceded decisive action in our most dangerous cases. His fingers drummed against the window frame with mathematical precision, and I could sense his extraordinary mind calculating distances, tides, and the rapidly diminishing possibilities for successful intervention. "The theatrical elements masked genuine criminal enterprise, Watson," he finally murmured as familiar landmarks emerged through the gathering dusk. "Our adversaries have transformed stage illusion into international conspiracy, though their ultimate purpose remains tantalizingly obscure despite the mounting evidence." Mrs. Hudson awaited us with obvious relief, and a telegram bearing the Thames River Police seal. Holmes tore open the yellow envelope with trembling fingers, his expression growing increasingly grave as he absorbed its devastating contents. "The barge Meridian passed Gravesend Customs at dawn," he announced quietly, proceeding toward channel waters beyond our immediate reach. The devastating intelligence regarding the Meridian's escape beyond English jurisdiction struck Holmes with the force of a physical blow. Yet his remarkable resilience transformed apparent defeat into renewed strategic calculation within moments of absorbing the telegram's contents. He spread the Thames charts across our breakfast table with methodical precision, his keen finger tracing the serpentine waterways that threaded through the Essex marshlands like arteries through some vast grey organism. A cargo barge of the Meridian's draft cannot risk the open channel waters, Watson, he declared with growing conviction, his voice carrying that particular intensity which marked his moments of crucial deduction. She must seek sheltered anchorage for her ultimate purpose, Holehaven Creek, the Crouch Estuary, or perhaps the isolated reaches beyond Foulness Island. His analysis possessed the mathematical certainty of tidal calculations, yet I detected underlying anxiety about the precious hours slipping away while our adversaries executed their elaborate finale. Consider the theatrical requirements, Watson. A man concealed within that mahogany cabinet cannot endure prolonged confinement without provisions for air circulation and basic sustenance. Therefore, their destination lies within reach of tonight's tide, accessible to vessels requiring discreet anchorage away from customs surveillance. Holmes immediately dispatched urgent telegrams to the Coast Guard stations at Sheerness and Burnham, providing detailed descriptions of the Meridian and requesting immediate interception should the vessel attempt passage through the monitored channels. Yet, even as he coordinated these official responses, his restless energy suggested deeper concerns about the conspiracy's true scope and ultimate objective. A sharp rap upon our door interrupted these frantic preparations, and Mrs. Hudson ushered in a breathless messenger bearing intelligence that transformed our investigation's entire complexion. The telegram, bearing the official seal of the Thames River Police, contained news both welcome and deeply troubling. Barge Meridian discovered, abandoned at Holehaven Creek. Cargo hold empty, no sign of passengers or crew. Vessel appears deliberately scuttled in shallow water. Holmes seized the message with trembling fingers, his eyes racing across the terse official language with characteristic intensity. "Abandoned," he murmured, his voice carrying notes of both triumph and growing apprehension. "Our theatrical conspirators have completed their performance and vanished into the Essex marshlands, leaving behind only the empty stage of their elaborate deception. The implications struck me with thunderous force. If the barge had been abandoned, what had become of Mr. Whitmore and his captors? Holmes's expression carried that particular gravity, which marked our most perilous moments as he processed the tactical significance of this development. "They have achieved their primary objective, Watson, whatever that may prove to be. The theatrical apparatus served its purpose, the victim has been transferred to their ultimate destination, and the evidence deliberately destroyed to confound pursuit." A second telegram arrived within minutes, this one bearing Miss Pembroke's distinctive handwriting and obvious emotional distress. Holmes read her urgent message aloud with growing concern. "Edgar appeared briefly at his lodgings this afternoon, collected personal papers, spoke strangely of urgent continental business, departed immediately without explanation. Fear something terrible has occurred." The revelation struck Holmes with visible impact, his keen mind immediately grasping the sophisticated nature of our adversary's ultimate strategy. Not simple kidnapping, Watson, but coercion of the most elaborate kind. They have used theatrical methods to isolate Mr. Whitmore completely, then manipulated him into executing some predetermined action, signing documents, transferring funds, or providing access to confidential business intelligence. Holmes rose abruptly, his breakfast abandoned in favor of immediate action. The abandoned barge represents misdirection of the highest order, designed to convince us that our quarry has escaped beyond recovery while they complete their true business within London itself. We have been pursuing shadows, while the genuine conspiracy unfolds beneath our very noses. His eyes blazed with that familiar fire of approaching triumph, though I sensed his growing concern about the precious time already lost to theatrical deception. "Prepare your medical bag, Watson, and your service revolver," Our adversaries have demonstrated willingness to employ violence when their elaborate schemes face exposure. The final act of this theatrical conspiracy awaits our immediate attention, and I fear it may prove the most dangerous of all. The fog pressed against our windows like some malevolent presence as we prepared for what promised to be the climactic confrontation with criminals who had transformed stage of illusion into sophisticated criminal enterprise of unprecedented audacity and cunning. Within the hour, we found ourselves standing before the Georgian facade of Mr. Whitmore's Belgravia lodgings, where the November fog seemed to press against the elegant windows like some malevolent spirit seeking entry into the sanctuary of respectability. Mrs. Pemberton, the landlady, received us with obvious relief, tinged by considerable anxiety about her tenant's peculiar afternoon behavior, her weathered hands wringing nervously as she recounted details that struck Holmes with the force of revelation. "Most unlike his usual manner, gentlemen," she reported, her voice trembling with genuine distress. Spoke barely a word, collected papers from his writing desk with hands that shook like autumn leaves, then departed without his customary courtesies. His eyes held a haunted quality I've never observed in 15 years of acquaintance, as if he'd witnessed something terrible that had shaken his very soul. Holmes examined Mr. Whitmore's chambers with that methodical precision which had solved countless mysteries throughout our partnership, his keen gaze absorbing every detail of the hastily searched writing desk, where drawers had been pulled open and papers scattered in obvious haste. Yet his attention focused upon a seemingly insignificant detail that had escaped the landlady's notice: a single drop of crimson sealing wax, still soft to the touch, that had fallen upon the Persian carpet beside the mahogany desk. "Fresh within the hour, Watson," he observed, touching the droplet delicately with his penknife blade. "Our Mr. Whitmore sealed legal documents under considerable duress, his hands trembling sufficiently to scatter wax beyond its intended target. His examination of the desk's leather surface revealed additional evidence, the faint impressions of handwriting pressed through thin paper, leaving ghostly traces of what appeared to be formal legal terminology and numerical figures of substantial magnitude. Holmes produced his graphite stick and tissue paper, carefully taking rubbings of these impressions with surgical precision that would have impressed the most demanding forensic specialist. The revealed text proved deeply troubling, fragments of what appeared to be a comprehensive power of attorney document with explicit references to warehouse properties, shipping manifests, and continental transfers. Most significantly, the signature area bore the distinctive pressure marks of someone writing under extreme psychological duress, coercion of the most sophisticated variety. "Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice carrying that dangerous quietness which invariably preceded decisive action in our most perilous cases. "They have employed theatrical methods not merely to isolate him physically, but to break his resistance completely through psychological manipulation, then forced him to execute legal documents that transfer control of his substantial business interests to their confederates." Mrs. Pemberton's testimony regarding Mr. Whitmore's departure proved equally illuminating when subjected to Holmes's penetrating analysis. Accompanied by a refined lady in dark traveling dress, she was, the landlady continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, spoke with educated accent, maintained proper deportment throughout their brief visit, yet something in her manner suggested absolute authority over poor Mr. Edgar that seemed most unnatural for a lady of apparent breeding. The description matched our accumulated intelligence regarding Miss Vivienne Vance perfectly, confirming Holmes's deductions about the conspiracy's theatrical sophistication and the psychological methods employed to transform a respectable businessman into an unwilling accomplice in his own financial destruction. Holmes immediately dispatched urgent telegrams to his network of legal informants, seeking intelligence about recent document filings that might reveal the conspiracy's ultimate objective. The responses arrived with gratifying speed, revealing a disturbing pattern of property transfers filed that very afternoon at Lincoln's Inn. where several valuable warehouse properties had been legally transferred to a newly formed commercial entity bearing the innocuous name Thames Maritime Ventures. The timing was devastatingly precise, documents filed within hours of Mr. Whitmore's coerced visit to his lodgings. The final piece of their elaborate theatrical puzzle. "Watson," Holmes declared with grim satisfaction as he studied the legal notifications spread across our hansome's leather seat. "They have used sophisticated psychological coercion to force Mr. Whitmore into legitimizing their theft through proper legal channels, creating an unassailable appearance of voluntary business transfer that will confound conventional investigation for months." Holmes's expression carried that particular intensity which marked his moments of approaching triumph, though I detected underlying concern about the precious time already lost to elaborate deception. "Yet they have made one crucial error in their theatrical perfection, Watson. Like all accomplished performers, they cannot resist the final bow, the moment when the audience recognizes their genius. Miss Vivian Vance will not simply disappear into continental anonymity. She will remain to witness the completion of her masterpiece." His eyes blazed with sudden comprehension as the final elements of his strategy crystallized. "We shall not pursue them as investigators seeking justice, Watson, but as concerned gentlemen bewildered by a friend's eccentric behavior, offering our assistance in locating the mysteriously absent Mr. Whitmore." The more confident they become in their deception's success, the more likely they are to reveal the crucial details we require for their ultimate exposure. As our hansom rattled through the fog-shrouded streets toward Limehouse, where the Vance commercial offices maintained their facade of maritime respectability, Holmes checked his revolver with characteristic precision while outlining the psychological tactics that would determine our success or failure. "Prepare yourself for the performance of our lives, Watson," he murmured as the familiar landmarks of the Thames docks emerged through the grey veil. "Our theatrical adversaries have demonstrated exceptional cunning, but they have never faced opponents who understand that the greatest deception lies in appearing to be deceived." The commercial offices of Vance Maritime Enterprises occupied a narrow building squeezed between weathered warehouses in the heart of Limehouse. Its modest brass nameplate suggesting respectable maritime commerce rather than the sophisticated criminal enterprise we now understood it to conceal. The November fog pressed against the grimy windows like some malevolent presence, while the interior maintained an atmosphere of legitimate business activity, with shipping charts adorning the walls and the distinctive aroma of tar and hemp suggesting genuine maritime connections. Holmes approached with that deceptive casualness which masked his most penetrating investigations, his manner conveying the concerned bewilderment of gentlemen seeking assistance rather than the deadly precision of hunters closing upon their quarry. A nervous clerk with ink-stained fingers received our inquiry regarding Mr. Whitmore's whereabouts with obvious discomfort. His eyes darting toward a closed door marked "private" whenever Holmes mentioned the missing gentleman's name. "Mr. Whitmore concluded his business with Miss Vance earlier this afternoon." The clerk reported with studied casualness that failed to conceal underlying tension. Seemed most satisfied with the arrangements, spoke enthusiastically about continental opportunities requiring immediate attention. At that moment, the private door opened to reveal Miss Vivian Vance herself, and I was immediately struck by her commanding presence, despite the refined femininity of her appearance. She possessed that theatrical bearing Professor Blackwood had described, with intelligent eyes that assessed our potential threat while maintaining perfect social composure. Her dark traveling dress was impeccably tailored, though I noticed the sapphire silk ribbon at her throat that matched our evidence samples with damning precision. "Gentlemen," she said, extending a gloved hand with gracious authority, "I understand you seek news of dear Edgar. I am delighted to report that he departed this afternoon in excellent health, having concluded most satisfactory business arrangements." Holmes accepted her greeting with charming deference, his manner conveying complete acceptance while his eyes recorded every detail. "Your assistance demonstrates remarkable dedication, Miss Vance. We had feared his sudden departure might indicate some distress or confusion. "Quite the contrary," she replied with theatrical conviction. Edgar expressed complete confidence in our arrangements, particularly regarding the continental ventures requiring his immediate personal attention. Aldrich Vance emerged from his office, a burly man with florid complexion and perpetually anxious frown. He greeted us with forced geniality, his eyes darting nervously between Holmes and his sister. "This business with Edgar is most unfortunate. Quite a shock to us all." Holmes turned his penetrating gaze upon the brother. "We were particularly perplexed by his sudden decision to transfer warehouse properties to your venture, executed with such haste. One might almost imagine he was under considerable persuasion." Aldrich blanched visibly, his composure cracking under Holmes's relentless scrutiny. "Business decisions are often made swiftly, Mr. Holmes." "Indeed," Holmes replied with dangerous quietness. Though Miss Pembroke mentioned his eyes held a haunted quality, as if he were not entirely himself. "Most peculiar for voluntary business dealings." Miss Vance stepped forward, her icy composure reasserting itself. "Mr. Holmes." Edgar communicated his intentions clearly. "Perhaps your concern clouds your judgment." "Perhaps," Holmes murmured, allowing doubt to color his tone. "Though I find true character remains constant, like true north. We simply wished to ensure he was making these decisions of his own free will, not under influence of some extraordinary theatrical performance." For a fleeting moment, her mask slipped, revealing a flash of anger quickly suppressed. Holmes had planted his seeds of doubt and fear with surgical precision. "Well," Holmes continued, rising with apparent resignation, "we have detained you long enough. However, I should mention that Mr. Grice of Lloyd's Banking will arrive shortly to verify certain legal formalities regarding the property transfers, a mere technicality, but one requiring Mr. Whitmore's personal signature before 8 o'clock this evening." The effect was electric. Miss Vance's composure flickered almost imperceptibly, while Aldrich's lips tightened before relaxing into a forced smile. "We shall accommodate any necessary formalities," she replied smoothly, though I detected steel beneath her refined exterior. As we departed, Holmes whispered urgent instructions to a ragged street urchin who materialized from the fog. "To Lestrade, plainclothes men at every exit, cordon at each alley mouth. No uniforms visible. Wait for my signal." The trap, exquisitely baited with the promise of legitimizing their theft, was set. Within the hour, we would return to witness the final act of this elaborate theatrical conspiracy, where the criminals' confidence in their deception would prove their ultimate undoing. The evening fog pressed against the windows of Vance Maritime Enterprises like a living thing as we returned with Inspector MacDonald, disguised as the banking representative, in his conservative attire and precise manner, creating the perfect illusion of bureaucratic authority. Holmes had transformed himself into Mr. Grice with subtle alterations, spectacles, a slight stoop, and that reedy voice of petty officialdom that would disarm even the most suspicious criminal. Lestrade's plainclothes men maintained their invisible positions throughout the narrow streets, awaiting the signal that would end this elaborate theatrical conspiracy. Miss Vivienne Vance received us with composed civility, though I observed the telltale tremor in her sapphire silk ribbon and the way her brother's eyes darted nervously toward the private door. "Mr. Grice," she said with theatrical warmth, "how punctual you are. We have Mr. Whitmore prepared for the final verification." Holmes adjusted his spectacles with bureaucratic precision. "Indeed, Miss Vance. The bank requires personal confirmation for transfers exceeding £40,000. A simple formality, but one demanding absolute accuracy." At her subtle signal, the private door opened to reveal Edgar Whitmore, and the sight struck me with profound dismay. The man who emerged bore only superficial resemblance to the confident gentleman we had known. His eyes held that vacant quality of one whose will has been systematically broken, His movements possessed the mechanical precision of a marionette following invisible strings, and his hands trembled with nervous exhaustion that spoke of prolonged psychological torment. "Mr. Whitmore," Holmes said gently, placing the verification documents before him with studied care. "Kindly confirm these arrangements with your customary acknowledgement." Miss Vance leaned forward with predatory attention, her voice a silken whisper. "Simply write your name and 'detained by business, Edgar,' the same phrase you always employ." Holmes's eyes met mine for the briefest instant. This was the moment upon which everything depended. Whitmore's pen hovered uncertainly above the paper, his damaged mind struggling against the conditioning that had made him their unwilling accomplice. Then, with gathering strength, his hand moved across the page in familiar patterns, writing in a voice that grew steadier with each letter. "Kept by business." The effect was electric. Holmes straightened to his full height, his disguise falling away like a discarded mask. "Inspector Lestrade," he called clearly, his voice carrying through the fog-shrouded building, "you may proceed with the arrests." The room erupted into controlled chaos as plainclothes officers materialized from every entrance, their movements precise and professional. Aldrich Vance lunged desperately toward a desk drawer, only to find my service revolver discouraging such action. While Miss Vance stood frozen in theatrical tableau, her composure finally shattered by the realization that her elaborate performance had been turned against her. "The final curtain, Miss Vance," Holmes said with quiet satisfaction, producing the accumulated evidence of their conspiracy. "Your theatrical training served you admirably." The impossible vanishing achieved through Professor Blackwood's cabinet methods, the silk threads and isinglass adhesive creating the illusion of supernatural disappearance, the coordinated timing with Guard Latham's cooperation, and the psychological manipulation that transformed Mr. Whitmore into your unwilling accomplice. He continued with relentless precision, connecting every clue we had gathered. The mahogany cabinet, constructed by Rook and Sons, the barge Meridian, providing river transport, the forged telegram dispatched by your Thames Confederate, all elements of an elaborate stage production designed to legitimize theft through apparent legal transfer. Yet you made one crucial error. You never learned that Mr. Whitmore habitually wrote, "kept by business," not "detained." That single word betrayed your entire performance. Miss Vance's theatrical composure returned briefly as the handcuffs closed about, and her wrists. "You cannot prove coercion, Mr. Holmes. The evidence of systematic psychological manipulation, combined with Mr. Whitmore's testimony once his mind recovers from your theatrical conditioning, will prove more than sufficient," Holmes replied with steel in his voice. As the prisoners were led away and medical attention summoned for our recovered friend, Miss Catherine Pembroke arrived like dawn, breaking through storm clouds. Her reunion with Edgar, though quiet, possessed that profound emotion which needs no theatrical embellishment to move the human heart. Later, as we returned through fog-cleared streets to Baker Street, Holmes reflected upon the case with characteristic philosophical detachment. "The stage teaches us that the most convincing illusions depend upon the audience's willingness to suspend disbelief, Watson. Our theatrical criminals simply forgot that truth requires no such suspension. It stands upon its own merits, immutable as natural law." The fire crackled warmly in our familiar sitting room as Holmes settled into his chair, already reaching for tomorrow's cases. Yet perhaps the most troubling aspect lies not in their criminal ingenuity, but in their willingness to destroy a human mind for mere financial gain. They transformed legitimate theatrical art into psychological torture of the most refined and devastating kind. I found myself reflecting upon the extraordinary complexity of the conspiracy we had unraveled, defeated ultimately, not by superior criminality, but by Holmes's understanding that even the most elaborate deceptions must conform to the immutable laws of human nature and physical evidence. The case of the Vanishing at Ironwood Crossing would long remain among our most challenging investigations, a testament to both criminal ingenuity and the ultimate triumph of methodical detection over theatrical deception.